I swear to God, this is a sword. Hey folks, welcome to ScholarBot Tarot. Just call me Mayfield, and thanks a ton for stopping by the study space. Today we're going to go ahead and take a look at a hashtag, a rather recent one actually, that I never really anticipated myself doing, but I figure it's pretty time sensitive. It is Queer Decks for Pride Month, and this hashtag was started by card slinger and fellow scholar Tom Benjamin. So I'll make sure I link his video in the description below. I have a couple of decks that are by queer people, or at the very least to understand just the sheer weight and importance of diversity within their art. And so I wanted to kind of sing their praises and show them off here. Now, what's kind of difficult for me is trying to figure out, okay, so I mean, why is a particular tarot deck, regardless of whether it was made by a queer person or not, like why would it necessarily qualify itself to be something to be used specifically for Pride Month? What about this deck, more than just representing people from LGBTQ plus spaces, makes it something that is worth using during this month? And I guess this is really just me trying to explore what exactly that means. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started as my altar cloth just falls off. Okay, so I readjusted my altar cloth, readjusted my little markers so I don't lose track of where I'm going. This is going to be largely unscripted, by the way. Typically, all of my, well, most of my videos, like I work off of a script, but we're gonna see how this works out. So for the first deck I wanted to show off is the Prismatic Tarot by non-binary artist Kelsey Showalter. And my box is a little dinged up, and that's actually because this is one of the first indie decks that I ever purchased. Now, in terms of the way that I use it, I mean, first and foremost, like, the art is so gorgeous. Like, I could stare at this card and this card alone, like, all day. But at any rate, so normally I am the type of person who enjoys using decks based off of their lore and their world building, and that's going to be a very common theme today. However, this one is a little bit different because it's very up close and personal, and as you're going to see a little bit in depth as I continue going through the cards, there is a lot of nudity in here. And the reason why I even bother pointing that out is because this deck asks you to be vulnerable, and it kind of does that by starting that conversation, right? Like, it's trying to show you that it's okay to be yourself and to be comfortable with yourself. And just the boldness and rawness in Showalter's art, I think, invites and encourages me personally to be purely myself. And I mean, that's not necessarily something I tend to do in my practice. I like to be immersed into a world, or immersed into a message that is, I guess, more general. But this one works so much better as, I guess, one of the few decks that I do use for like shadow work, because I mean, there's really no other way for me to use it, I don't think. I mean, this deck is quite pippish at times, but I think that's perfectly okay considering how up close and personal it can be. And I just think it's a very playful and intimate deck to use in more ways than one. And so I think that this is a wonderful deck to use during Pride Month because of that. The next deck I'd like to show off is the Lost Hollow Tarot by James from PixelOccult. I'm going to try to be careful not to get too much glare on the tin box. But this is a standard edition, and this is also the Kickstarter edition. I backed this on Kickstarter what feels like an eternity ago. I want to say it was like in the beginnings, either the beginning or like closer to the middle part of quarantine. But this one has the, let me grab it really quick. This has the Kickstarter exclusive death card, and it also has the different variations, like whichever one you decide to use, whether you'd like to use the RWS version or the Thoth numbering system, whichever one you're more comfortable with, which I thought was kind of cool. Very inclusive of James. And on that note, I mean, this deck is, I mean, it does representation of ethnic backgrounds, gender identities, of course, and different like body types, which we'll see in just a moment. But this one's just really awesome to use because it's got like that sort of cyberpunk gothic energy, which I do believe James uses pretty often. I think all of his decks take place in like this cyberpunk gothic wasteland. And what's really wonderful about that is being able to immerse oneself in that type of world as you are. And I guess it's just kind of nice to think about us suffering in a place, you know, together, or perhaps thriving in less than an ideal situation. But this deck is very dramatic. It's I almost wanted to say bold, but I would argue that perhaps the second edition is a little bit bolder in terms of color, because again, this is the first edition, so it has the borders and it's a little bit more beigey kind of. But the second edition has like bolder reds and whites, and it is also borderless. And I almost considered getting a copy of that, but I'm like, no, gotta stick to the one that I have. The only downside to this deck, and this is purely a me problem, is that I seldom get very good messages from that, so I'm still struggling with how I want to use it. But let me pause really quick just to say that the Lovers card is just a very just smart card, I think. And I think that it's absolutely beautiful the way that it depicts all types of different relationships, and I would even argue that this is a wonderful card for polyamorous people. But I just wanted to mention that. And I do know that there is kind of a stereotype of the chariot being depicted by somebody in a wheelchair, but I can promise you that in this deck, it's not just in the chariot that we see different types of bodies. Like here we see the Six of Wands as someone in a wheelchair, and I think there's another card where there's somebody who's using crutches, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I really like just how dramatic and gothic that this deck is. And I mean, maybe I do try to play with it every once in a while, and I am trying to do that for Pride, but you know, at some point this thing is going to have to give me a good message, right? God damn it. Alright, so I'm keeping in line with my all-time favorite theme of immersion and world building. I wanted to show off a little bit of the Numinous Tarot by Cedar McCloud, another non-binary artist actually. So what's really super awesome about this deck is just how familiar it feels, and also how out of reach it feels at times whenever I do play around with it. Because this deck just reminds me of one of my favorite places. It's Hillcrest in San Diego, which tends to be where they have their Pride parades. I remember Hillcrest, growing up, every once in a while I would visit a friend out there, and I mean, there would even be this area right here with the little free library and everything. Like, I feel like I can envision that street, although I think it's like a little farther, like a little away from the Gaslamp district, but not very far from it. But at any rate, I remember that place and how inclusive and welcoming and just so freeing it felt being there. And like, this is the type of world that I would want to help cultivate into creation, like a world that prioritized and actively chose education and love for a healing community, which I feel like we are in kind of a desperate need of right now. And just to be able to see just so many different people, all of them different shapes, sizes, different colors, different backgrounds, different experiences, and just seeing them depicted and participating in this deck, and then me being invited to participate as well, is I mean, I almost can't even describe like the feeling that brings me, because I would hope so badly that one day we could cultivate that kind of world. And I mean, this deck just brings so much hope for that, I think. And I mean, hey, if it exists in somebody's imagination, then I'm sure it could be something that we can make for us and for future generations, right? All right, so there's seeing oneself, like being immersed and being seen by these characters and participating in these worlds. And then there's being a part of a Baroque painting as though you have always been there. And that is done in none other than the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. Such classical beauty in this deck that is just so much fun to play around with. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, LGBTQ plus people have always been around. We just now have names for them. And we have titles and categories, and we have the means of being able to not only accept that, but to take care of the people who, you know, are who they say they are. And I just really love this deck for, I mean, of course, how absolutely gorgeous it is, but I think it's a wonderful tool to use during Pride, because it's so much more than just being seen and occupying space. It's also thriving in it, and you know, just kind of saying it with your chest. Like for me, for example, I'm pansexual. I always have been. and it's just it has like a different air of confidence than, you know, the Prismatic Tarot that I showed, because that one was, you know, really quite intimate. I feel like this one is no, not communal, because I feel like that was probably more the Numinous Tarot, as well as the Lost Hollow Tarot, as much of not great messages it was giving me. But for this one, it's just such a worldly type of world that Fyodor Pavlov created and that he shared with the rest of us. And that's just something that I can never not appreciate. And I mean, yeah, you got a little kink in here, which is always welcomed. But I did actually want to show you, I mean, I feel like there's no flip through that is complete without showing the reason why we all fell in love with this deck, or at least I fell in love with it. And I know a lot of other people just absolutely swooned over the image. And yeah, I know you saw it on the box cover, but you know, we got to see it in all its glory. Ah, found it. Our Lover's card. A quick little story. So when I got this deck, I showed this card to a friend of mine, and I'll never forget their reaction to it. They're like, "Oh, that's really pretty." Like they pulled the old switcheroo, and like that was such a strange thing to say. Like I'm not dogging on them, of course, but I'm also thinking like no, like they don't have each other's genitals, like that's theirs, and that's part of them. That is also them. This is a woman's penis. That is a man's vulva. And that, I mean, they are all of them. I don't know if that makes sense. Like she is her and he is him. If that makes any sense. I apologize if I'm rambling, but that was such such an insightful moment that I almost had like an I thou moment with a card, which I don't think is possible, but here we are. Okay, now for some honorable mentions. For the first one, I wanted to show off the Divine Diversity by Joe Phillips. I'm trying to figure out how to explain why I'm making this an honorable mention. I mean, let's take a moment to just appreciate the purple gilding. I'm sorry if this is blinding. These are the backs. And these are the cards. So I feel like this, for me, is more of a thirst deck, which is why I have it in honorable mention. That isn't, of course, inherently a bad thing or anything, but for me, it's just more of like I use this deck for sex positivity reasons, and I think that's what I wanted to really appreciate this deck for, is that it just feels like those racy calendars that you get, you know, of a man shirtless and hairy and working on a house or whatever. Because I mean there are a lot of really sexy cards in here, and I mean that's kind of the point, right? But yeah, I just wanted to make mention of this deck and really appreciate it for you know what it does for me, maybe even what it does for you, and just acknowledge that I do indeed use the shit out of this during Pride Month as well as all year round. But yeah, Divine Diversity. Oh, and actually, before I forget, there is a couple of alternates that the artist that Phillips so kindly drew that I actually didn't think he would do. But there are alternative lovers. I use this one just because I really like this one. And there are also alternative devil cards. I use the one with two men, which, or I guess technically three men. And for the last deck that I'm going to show you, another honorable mention is the Tarot of the Silicon Dawn by Egypt Urnash. The main reason I wanted to show this deck off is, I mean, the reason why it's an honorable mention is because it is out of print, and I don't believe you can get it at a reasonable price anymore. But these are some of the extra cards that she did. Like this one, we see an intersexed person, which I think is a really pretty card. And then they have she has like a void thing, and then like some very cartoony extras. But as for the main deck, I wanted to appreciate this deck for just how familiar it feels to me as a historian. I will be completely honest and say that I'm not very well read with queer history as much as I would like to be, but something about the images in this deck feel so familiar. Like I think of the Harlem Renaissance, and at times I even think of like the gay liberation movement, and I don't even know where I'm going with this. Like I feel like there's something historically relevant about this deck. And I could very well be just making this up, but I suppose I'll just save that for the book report that I end up doing if I get to this deck, which I really would like to. Oh, and it has like 1,000 fools, but but this deck is just so elegant, I think, much like the other ones. But I did actually kind of want to draw your attention to this card, because this card is what really prompted me to start thinking about just the strife and struggle, like with being who one is and feeling completely helpless. And you know, as I started going through the rest of the cards, some of the pieces were being put back together, where I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I feel like I read something like in a history book about just the struggles of of um, of queer people and, you know, other marginalized people. And I think that this deck is really quite relevant when it comes to queer history, or Pride Month. Is just remembering the history, right? And there you have it. Those are all the decks that I particularly enjoy using during Pride. I do use these decks all year round, as I've previously mentioned, but it's pretty wonderful just to have a moment to be able to play around with, you know, one's pleasure, perhaps one's aspirations for what you want the community to look like in the future. Trying to figure where you've been this entire time, understanding the history that essentially makes up our present, and trying to figure out where, honestly, where you fall into all of this. Special thanks to Tom Benjamin for starting this hashtag. I thought it was a lot of fun to kind of go through my collection and see what sort of queer decks that I enjoy using during Pride, and it was a lot of fun playing around with the decks as I started thinking about what I wanted to record. I always think it's so wonderful to do these kinds of things, just because it really gives us a little bit of perspective on what it means to celebrate Pride Month and how you want that to look like. And doesn't necessarily have to be a right way to do it, so long as you're not hurting anyone. But I mean, I don't really see that happening. Just to wrap this up, thanks for letting me do this palette cleanser. I needed it from the last video that I did, and you know, I guess Los Scarabeo does have a couple of hits, right? But without further ado, guys, thank you so much for stopping by the study space. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!